She found the text message at 11:47 at night. The kitchen light was on the way. It was always on past midnight in this house. A single overhead fixture that buzzed faintly when the refrigerator ran and cast everything in the kind of yellow light that made ordinary things look like they were waiting for something. The countertop held the usual evidence of a long Tuesday. A dusting of flour near the stove that she hadn't wiped down yet. A dish towel folded twice, the way her mother had taught her to fold it, because her mother believed that the way you treated small things said something true about you. A rolling pin laid parallel to the counter's edge. A recipe book with a cracked spine sitting where it always sat at the far left corner of the counter, close enough to reach without moving her feet. She had lived in this kitchen for 14 months. She knew the way the floorboard near the stove creaked when you stepped on it wrong. She knew the way the faucet dripped if you didn't turn it all the way off just once, just enough to hear it in the quiet. She knew the specific sound the oven made when it reached temperature, a soft click, almost polite, like it was letting her know without making a fuss. She had learned this kitchen the way you learn anything that becomes yours. Slowly, then completely. The phone on the dish rack wasn't hers. It belonged to Diane. The woman who lived 2 doors down, in Unit 7, had spent the better part of the last several months becoming the closest thing Cassie had to a steady presence in a life that had not been steady for a very long time. Diane was in her mid-50s, practical in the way that certain women become practical after enough years of handling things on their own. She showed up when she said she would. She watched Noah Cassie's 6-year-old son on the evenings when Cassie needed to be somewhere else. She didn't ask questions that weren't her business, and she didn't offer opinions that weren't asked for. She had left the phone behind when she picked up her jacket an hour ago and said goodnight. It happened sometimes. Diane moved through a room the way certain people do, leaving small things behind without noticing. A coffee mug rinsed but not shelved. A hair tie on the bathroom doorknob. Tonight, a phone on the dish rack screen facing up. Cassie picked it up, meaning to dial her own number. One ring let Diane know simple. She had done it before. The screen lit before she could open the keypad. A message notification appeared at the top of the screen. The name above it was one she recognized. The preview showed the first 11 words of the message in the small gray text that appears before you open anything, before you choose to see it, before you have any say in what your eyes take in. She read those 11 words. She didn't mean to. She would think about that later, in the way you think about the exact moment before something changes, trying to locate the last second when everything was still the way it was. She hadn't meant to read it. The words had simply been there, the way a sound is already inside you, before you realize you've heard it. She set the phone down on the counter. She stood at the counter for a moment without moving. The refrigerator ran its steady hum, the sound this kitchen made when it was doing what kitchens do in the hours when no one is watching. Outside, a car moved slowly down the street. Its headlights crossed the window above the sink and disappeared. The house made the small settling sounds that houses make after midnight, the kind that are easy to explain and somehow never feel explained. Tomorrow was the custody hearing. She had been preparing for 30 days. 30 days of folders and printed documents and phone calls with her lawyer, a careful woman named Patricia, who spoke in measured sentences and never said anything she couldn't back up. 30 days of organizing everything she had built in the last 18 months into something a stranger in a courtroom could understand in an afternoon. The business records, the bank statements, the license, the contract she had signed 3 weeks ago and scanned back from the library on Sutherland Avenue because she didn't own a printer. 30 days of telling herself she was ready. She looked at the phone on the counter. She looked at the recipe book at the edge of the counter. It had a water stain on the lower right corner of the cover, small and faded, that had been there since before she could remember. The spine was cracked in 2 places from being opened flat too many times. Her mother had kept it in a kitchen, not much different from this one, in a house 3 states away that Cassie hadn't been back to since the funeral. She looked at the stove. She reached over and turned the oven on. The dial clicked into place. The interior light came on dim and amber, and the coils at the bottom began to warm in the slow, reliable way that they always warmed. The oven didn't know what night it was. It didn't know about tomorrow, or about the folder sitting on the kitchen table, or about the 30 days that had led to this one. It simply did what it had always done, without hesitation and without drama, because that was what it was built for. She pulled the recipe book from the counter and held it. She had opened this book more times than she could count in the last year and a half. She had opened it when she didn't know what else to open. She had opened it at 4 a.m. and at noon on a Sunday, and once in a parking lot, sitting in her car, because she needed to see her mother's handwriting, and she needed to see it right then. She opened it now. She looked at the first page. She thought about the 11 words one more time, the way you return to something that doesn't make sense yet, hoping the second time through will be different from the first. It wasn't different. She sat down on the kitchen floor. 18 months earlier, Cassie Drummond had $14.22, a 6-year-old son, and a restraining order worth exactly as much as the paper it was printed on. The apartment on Birchwood Lane was on the 3rd floor of a building that smelled like other people's cooking, an old carpet, and the particular staleness of a place where nobody had opened a window in too long. Unit 312. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen the size of a generous closet, and walls thin enough that she could hear her upstairs neighbor's television every night until 11. It was the first place she had ever signed a lease on by herself. She had stood at the rental office counter with a cashier's check and a photo ID and her own signature, and the woman behind the desk had handed her 2 keys on a plain metal ring, and Cassie had walked to her car and sat there for a few minutes before she trusted herself to drive. That had been 3 weeks ago. This particular morning, a Tuesday in early March, she sat at the kitchen table with everything she owned of value spread out in front of her. A $5 bill, 4 ones, a quarter, 3 dimes, a nickel, 7 pennies. She had counted it twice already. She counted it again because counting gave her hands something to do, and her hands needed something to do. $14.22. She pressed the bills flat against the table, with her palm smoothing out the creases the way her mother had always smoothed out creases, because her mother had believed that money deserved to be treated with a certain amount of respect, regardless of how little of it you had. Cassie had thought that was a strange philosophy when she was young. She understood it better now. From the smaller bedroom down the hall came the sound of small feet on a hardwood floor, and then Noah appeared in the kitchen doorway. He was 6 years old and still had the particular solemnness of a child who had learned early that the adults around him were dealing with things they weren't explaining. He was wearing a blue shirt with a cartoon truck on the front and holding the stuffed bear he'd had since he was 2, the one with the left ear that had been re-sewn so many times. The thread was a different color than the original. He looked at the money on the till. He looked at his mother. "Are we having breakfast?" he asked. "In a minute," she said. He climbed into the chair across from her and set the bear on the table and waited the way he had learned to wait, with a patience that no 6-year-old should have needed to develop. Cassie looked at the money. She thought about the last 5 years, the way you think about a stretch of road you drove in the dark. You know you covered the distance, but you can't account for all of it. She had been 26 when she married Kyle Drummond. She had believed with the specific confidence of someone who has not yet been taught otherwise that she was a good judge of people. It took 14 months for her to understand she had been wrong about that. It took another 3 years and 4 months to find a way out that stuck. She didn't think about those years in detail. There was no use in the detail. What mattered now was the apartment on the 3rd floor and the 2 keys on the plain metal ring and the $14.22 on the table, and the boy across from her who was watching her with his father's eyes and his grandmother's patience, and a whole life in front of him that she intended to make worth something. She pushed back from the table and went to the hallway closet. On the top shelf, behind a stack of Noah's winter clothes and a box of things she hadn't unpacked yet, was a moving box she had carried from the old house herself separate from everything else, because it was the one box she would not have trusted to anyone. She lifted it down carefully and carried it to the kitchen table. Inside, wrapped in a dish towel, printed with faded yellow sunflowers, was a tin box with a hinged lid that had belonged to her mother. Inside the tin were the things her mother had considered worth keeping: a folded letter, a photograph of two women standing in front of a car, squinting into the sun, a small envelope of pressed flowers, dried to paper, and at the bottom, beneath all of it, a recipe book. It was not much to look at. A soft cover, once blue, faded to something closer to gray. Pages that had swelled and dried so many times from kitchen steam that they no longer lay fully flat. Handwriting inside, in her mother's particular script, small, left-leaning, unhurried, the handwriting of a woman who believed that if something was worth writing down, it was worth writing down carefully. Cassie set it on the table. She opened it to the first page. Her mother had written 4 lines there. Not a recipe, just a note in the same careful script. These are the things I know how to make. I hope you'll make them too. And when you don't know what to do next, make the pie. She read the 4 lines twice. Then she turned to the pie section and found the recipe she remembered from childhood, the one her mother had made every Thanksgiving and every birthday, and every time someone in the family needed something that felt like home. She got up and went to the cabinet. She had almost nothing, but she had flour, and she had butter, and she had enough. She worked slowly, measuring by memory more than by the page, because her hands remembered things her mind had almost let go of. Noah watched from his chair, without speaking, the stuffed bear propped beside him like a small audience member, both of them still and attentive in the thin morning light coming through the kitchen window. The pie went into the oven. When it came out 40 minutes later, the crust was uneven on one side and slightly darker than it should have been at the edge, and it was the best thing she had made in years. She cut 2 slices and set one in front of Noah and one at her own place and sat down. Noah picked up his fork. He took one bite and chewed slowly, the way children chew when something has their full attention. He looked up at her. "It smells like Grandma's house," he said. He had never been to Grandma's house. The casserole was chicken and rice, covered in aluminum foil, still warm on the bottom. 4 days had passed since the morning of the pie. 4 days of unpacking boxes that didn't have enough in them, of walking Noah to the school 3 blocks over and watching him disappear through the double doors with his backpack and his stuffed bear tucked under one arm, of coming back to the apartment and standing in the kitchen with the recipe book open on the counter and no particular plan. 4 days of figuring out what the new version of a Tuesday looked like when you were building it from scratch. The knock came on a Wednesday afternoon just after 3. The woman standing in the hallway was somewhere in her mid-50s, with short gray hair and the kind of posture that suggested she had spent a significant portion of her life standing in front of people who needed to pay attention. She was holding the casserole dish with both hands and wearing a canvas jacket, the color of old moss. She introduced herself as Diane. She said she lived in Unit 7 2 doors down and that she had made too much for one person, which happened more than she liked to admit. She did not ask about the restraining order notice that had been partially visible through the open door behind Cassie. She did not ask about Noah's father or about the boxes that were still stacked in the living room, or about the particular expression that Cassie suspected she was wearing, the one that said she was holding a great number of things together through sheer stubbornness and not much else. She just held out the casserole dish and said, "You don't have to invite me in." Cassie invited her in. They sat at the kitchen table with 2 plates and 2 glasses of water and the recipe book pushed to the side. And Diane talked about the building, which neighbors were friendly, which ones played music too loud on weekends, where the laundry machines were, and which one ate quarters without washing anything. She talked the way a person talks when they understand that what the other person needs is not advice or questions, but simply the sound of a calm voice, filling up a room that has been too quiet. Noah came home at 3:30 and stopped in the kitchen doorway the same way he always stopped in doorways, assessing. Diane looked at him and said, "You must be the man of the house." Noah considered this for a moment with great seriousness and then said, "I'm 6. Diane said that was a good age for it. Noah apparently agreed because he sat down and accepted a plate of chicken and rice without further discussion. After that, Diane came by on Tuesdays and Thursdays. It was not something they formally arranged. It simply became the pattern, the way certain things become patterns, when two people are practical enough to recognize what works, and neither of them has the time or the inclination to make it complicated. Diane would arrive at 5:30, and Cassie would go to the library on Sutherland Avenue and sit at one of the public computers and work through the things she needed to figure out. And when she came back, Noah would be fed and doing homework at the kitchen table, and Diane would be reading in the armchair by the window as though she had always been there. It was on one of these library evenings that Cassie found what she had been looking for, without knowing she was looking for it. Tennessee Cottage Food Law. She read the page twice, and then read it again, the way you read something that seems too useful to be real. The state of Tennessee allowed individuals to prepare and sell certain foods, baked goods, jams, pies, directly to consumers from their home kitchen without a commercial license or a health department inspection. There were limits, a ceiling on annual revenue, a requirement to label every product with the ingredients and the name and address of the home kitchen, a restriction to direct sales only, no stores, no shipping, only person to person. She wrote the key points on the back of a receipt from the dollar store and folded it into her jacket pocket and walked home in the dark, thinking about pie. When she got back to the apartment, she told Diane what she'd found. Diane listened without interrupting, which was one of the things Cassie had come to appreciate about her. She had the rare quality of listening, as though what you were saying actually mattered, without already preparing what she was going to say next. When Cassie finished, Diane said, "Market Square, Farmers Market, downtown every Saturday, April through October. Vendor fee is $30. You'd need a folding table and a sign and something worth selling." She paused. "You have the something worth selling." Cassie looked at her. "I tried a piece," Diane said simply. "Last week, when you left the half-eaten one on the counter. I hope that's all right." She did not appear particularly concerned about whether it was all right. "Your mother taught you well." Cassie didn't correct her. Her mother had taught her. That was true enough. Over the next 2 weeks, Diane helped in the way that she helped with everything, practically without ceremony, without making Cassie feel that she was receiving something she hadn't earned. She drove her to the kitchen supply store on a Saturday morning and waited in the car while Cassie bought a folding table and a set of pie tins, with the last of what she had. She explained the labeling requirements she had looked up herself, because of course she had looked them up herself. She offered to watch Noah on the Friday night before the first market Saturday, so that Cassie could bake without interruption. The night before the first Saturday, Cassie stood at the door of Unit 7 with the spare key to her apartment on its plain metal ring. She had been thinking about it for 3 days. She told herself it was practical. Diane watched Noah regularly. It made sense for her to have a key. All of that was true. It was also true that giving someone a key was the kind of thing Cassie had not done for anyone in a very long time. It was the kind of thing that required a particular quality of trust, the kind that is not built through grand gestures, but through chicken and rice on a Wednesday, and a woman who listened without already deciding what to say. She held out the key. Diane took it without making it into a moment, which was exactly the right thing to do. Cassie put the key in Diane's hand. It felt like the right thing to do. It felt like trust. The alarm went off at 4:50 in the morning, and Cassie was already awake. She had been awake since 3:30, lying in the dark, with the specific alertness of someone whose mind had decided that sleep was no longer relevant to the situation. She had gone over the numbers again in her head. 6 pies, each cut into 8 slices. 48 slices at $3 each. $144 gross, if she sold everything minus the $30 vendor fee minus ingredients. She had done this calculation so many times in the last week that it had stopped feeling like math and started feeling like a prayer. She dressed in the dark. She loaded the pies into the back of her car, a 2011 Honda Civic with a check engine light that had been on for so long she had stopped seeing it. She went back upstairs and picked up Noah, who was already dressed because she had laid his clothes out the night before, and he had apparently put them on in his sleep, or something close to it. He came down the stairs, holding his bear, and a box of crayons without being asked. He was 6 years old and already understood that Saturday mornings were different now. Market Square was 4 miles from the apartment. She found her assigned space, a 10 by 10 square of pavement marked with chalk, and set up her folding table, while Noah sat on the curb and watched the other vendors arrange their displays. Around her, farmers unloaded crates of early spring vegetables. A woman in a red apron set out jars of honey in 3 careful rows. A man 2 spaces down assembled a rack of handmade leather goods with the efficiency of someone who had done it 300 times. Everyone had tablecloths. Everyone had signs. Everyone had the particular ease of people who knew exactly what they were doing and had known it for years. Cassie had a folding table, 6 pies on a cooling rack, a piece of cardboard she had lettered by hand with a black marker, and a 6-year-old sitting on the curb eating a granola bar. The market opened at 7. By 9:15, she had sold nothing. People walked past. Some glanced at the table. Most did not. The ones who glanced offered the brief, polite non-smile of people who had already decided they were not stopping. The expression that means "I see you, but I am not for you, and we both understand that, and there is no hard feeling in it." She smiled back anyway. She had decided before she came that she would smile at everyone regardless, because her mother had told her once that the way you hold yourself when things aren't working says more about you than the way you hold yourself when they are. By 9:30, she was having a quiet conversation with herself about whether this had been a reasonable idea. Noah had moved from the curb to the ground beside the table. He had taken a flattened paper bag from somewhere, she didn't ask where, and spread it on the pavement and was drawing on it with his crayons, with the focused intensity he brought to most things. She glanced down at what he was drawing. It appeared to be a pie, a large circular pie with steam lines rising from it in careful spirals, and below it, in the large, uneven letters of a child who has recently learned that letters have a function, the words, "My mom's pie." She looked at it for a moment. She looked at her cardboard sign. She did not say anything. She reached down and picked up the paper and propped it against the front of the table next to the cardboard sign and went back to standing behind her display. 4 minutes later, a woman in a green fleece jacket stopped. She was not looking at the pies. She was looking at the paper. On the ground, Noah had taken it back and was adding what appeared to be a sun in the upper corner. The woman watched him for a moment with the expression that certain adults get around children who are paying attention to something, a kind of involuntary softening. She looked up at Cassie. "How old is he?" 6, Cassie said. The woman looked at the pies. She looked at the cardboard sign. She looked back at the paper Noah was drawing on. "Can I try a slice?" she asked. Her name was Barbara, and she taught 4th grade at an elementary school on the north side of town, and she ate her slice of pie standing at Cassie's table with the focused attention of someone conducting a serious evaluation. She chewed slowly. She looked at the crust. She looked at the filling. She took a second bite. She bought 2 whole pies. She pulled out her phone and made a call before she had walked 10 steps. Cassie could not hear what she said. She did not need to. 12 minutes later, a man in a running jacket appeared and bought a pie without asking the price first. After him, 2 women together, then a family with a stroller, then a teenager, sent by someone Cassie couldn't see, with exact change already counted out. Word of mouth is not a strategy. It is what happens when something is good enough that the person who finds it cannot keep it to themselves. By 11:30, the cooling rack was empty. The cardboard sign was propped against the table leg. Noah was asleep in the folding chair she had brought for herself, one crayon still loose in his hand, his bear wedged between his hip and the armrest. Cassie counted the money. in the front seat of the Civic, smoothing each bill flat against her thigh. The way her mother had smoothed bills, making the money neat, making it real. After the vendor fee and the cost of ingredients, she had cleared $112. She sat with that number for a moment. $112 from 6 pies and a 6-year-old's drawing and one woman who had stopped for the right reason at the right time. She folded the bills and put them in the envelope she had brought and put the envelope in her jacket pocket and started the car. On the drive home, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. She answered on the 4th ring. She had changed her number twice in the 14 months since she left. The first time was 3 weeks after she moved out, when the messages were coming in at a frequency that made her phone feel like something she didn't want to touch. The second time was 5 months after that, when the first new number somehow stopped being new. She had never been able to explain how he found them. Her lawyer had theories. Cassie had learned to stop trying to understand it and simply treat it as a fact of her life, the way you treat weather, not because you accept it, but because understanding it doesn't change it. She answered because she had learned through experience that not answering did not make things go away. It only meant she found out later, and later was always worse. The voice on the other end was not his. It was a woman's voice, professional, and measured the voice of someone who delivered difficult information for a living and had learned to do it without apology or excess. She introduced herself as the assistant to a family law attorney in Knoxville. She said her employer had been retained by a Mr. Kyle Drummond in connection with a petition for modification of the existing custody arrangement regarding a minor child, Noah James Drummond, age 6. Cassie pulled into a parking lot off Cumberland Avenue and put the car in park. She listened to the rest of it without speaking. The petition had been filed 2 days ago. A copy would be sent to her address of record. She would need to respond within 21 days, or the court would proceed without her response. The assistant offered the name of a legal aid office in the way that people offer things they are required to offer and do not expect to be taken seriously. Cassie thanked her. She did not know why she thanked her. It was simply what came out. She sat in the parking lot for a long time after the call ended. Kyle Drummond had not been a presence in Noah's life for the better part of a year. He had not called on Noah's birthday. He had not sent anything at Christmas. He had been in every practical sense absent, which was something Cassie had understood to be a loss for Noah and a relief for herself, and she had tried to hold both of those things at the same time, without letting either one take over. She had learned about his new attorney 3 days later, when her own lawyer called. Patricia Okafor had been practicing family law in Knoxville for 19 years. She was a small woman with close-cropped hair and reading glasses she wore on a chain around her neck, and the particular quality of stillness that very experienced attorneys develop the ability to sit with difficult information without reacting to it, which Cassie had found both reassuring and unnerving in equal measure. Patricia explained the petition over the phone in the same measured way she explained everything. Kyle's attorney was arguing that Cassie's current situation represented an unstable environment for a child. The evidence they intended to present included her recent departure from steady employment, her current income, which consisted entirely of weekend market sales of homemade food products, and the irregular hours that such an operation required. "He's using the pie sales," Cassie said. "He's using everything available to him," Patricia said. "That is what people do in these situations. The pie sales are part of it, yes." Cassie looked out the windshield at the parking lot. A woman was loading groceries into the back of an SUV, 2 rows over, moving quickly, efficiently, like someone with a full afternoon ahead of her. "What do I need?" Cassie asked. Patricia was quiet for a moment, which was never a good sign. Then she said, "Documentation, a demonstrated pattern of stable income. Ideally, something that shows this is a legitimate business operation, and not," she paused, choosing her words with the care she always chose them, "a temporary arrangement. How much does that cost to put together?" "The documentation is mostly your work. My work is the filing and the court representation." Another pause. "My retainer for a custody modification case is $4,500. I can give you 60 days before I need it in full. Cassie wrote the number on the back of the envelope that still held the day's earnings. $4,500. 60 days. She drove home. Noah was at the kitchen table with Diane when she came in working through a worksheet from school with a pencil he had sharpened down to almost nothing. Diane was sitting across from him with a cup of tea, following along without helping, which was exactly the right approach with Noah, who did not like to be helped unless he had specifically requested it. Diane looked up when Cassie came in. She read the room the way she always read it, quickly and without making it obvious, and she did not ask any questions. Cassie set her keys on the counter. She looked at the recipe book sitting in its usual place at the corner of the counter. She thought about $4,500. She thought about 60 days. She thought about 6 pies and $112. And Barbara, from the elementary school on the north side of town, who had called someone before she'd walked 10 steps. She thought about what her mother had written on the first page. When you don't know what to do next, make the pie. She had not known what to do next a year ago, when she was sitting at a kitchen table with $14 and a boy who asked if they were having breakfast. She had opened the book, and she had made the pie, and something had come from it that she had not been able to predict. She looked at the book. She did not reach for it yet, but she looked at it. That night, Noah asked if Diane could come for dinner. Cassie said yes without thinking. She always said yes without thinking. Math was the only thing that didn't lie to her anymore. She had learned this the hard way, through years of believing things that turned out not to be true, promises, explanations, the particular kind of reassurance that sounds like safety and isn't. Numbers didn't do that. A number was what it was. It didn't change depending on who was in the room, or what mood they were in, or what they needed you to believe. You could be angry at a number, but you couldn't argue with it. And there was something clarifying about that, something almost like relief. The morning after the phone call from the attorney's assistant, Cassie sat at the kitchen table before Noah woke up with a legal pad and a pen and began writing things down. She wrote what she knew: 6 pies per Saturday, roughly $12 in ingredients per pie, $30 vendor fee per market day, current selling price, $3 per slice, 8 slices per pie. She wrote what she needed: $4,500, 60 days, 8 Saturdays. She did the arithmetic. At current production and pricing, she would clear roughly $80 per Saturday after costs. 8 Saturdays, $640. That was not $4,500. The distance between those two numbers was not a rounding error. It was a different category of problem entirely. She flipped to a fresh page and started over. The cottage food law set a ceiling of $25,000 in annual revenue. She was nowhere near that ceiling. What she needed was not permission to grow, she already had that. What she needed was volume, and volume required 2 things: more product and a price that reflected what the product actually was. She had been selling pie at $3 a slice because it had felt like the right number, the approachable number, the number that wouldn't make someone walk away. But Barbara had bought 2 whole pies without hesitating, and the man in the running jacket hadn't asked the price before he handed over his money. Cassie thought about that for a while. She thought about the way Diane had said, "You have the something worth selling," without qualifying it. She crossed out the 3 and wrote $450. She crossed that out and wrote 5. She left the 5. She spent the next 3 evenings at the library on Sutherland Avenue, working through the Tennessee cottage food regulations, line by line, the way Patricia worked through legal documents, methodically, without skipping anything, because the thing you skip is always the thing that matters. She learned what she could sell and what she couldn't. She learned the labeling requirements in detail. She learned that she could sell at any farmer's market in the state, could take pre-orders, could deliver directly to a customer's door. She could not sell through a store. She could not ship across state lines. She could not operate out of a kitchen that had been inspected and licensed as a commercial facility, which meant that as long as she was under the cottage food law, she was limited to her apartment kitchen and its single oven, and its single rack, and its single output. She needed more oven. The answer came from an unexpected direction, the way answers sometimes do, when you have been sitting with a problem long enough that you stop looking for it directly, and it finds you instead. She had started attending Sunday services at Calvary Baptist on Magnolia Avenue, 3 weeks after moving to Birchwood Lane. Not from any sudden urgency of faith, but because Noah had asked about church the way children sometimes ask about things they have seen other children do, and because she had wanted to give him something consistent, something that happened the same way every week, regardless of what else was happening. After the fourth Sunday, she stayed to help fold chairs. The pastor, a man named Reverend Cole, steady-voiced and unhurried, with the patient manner of someone who had heard a great many things and been surprised by very few of them, mentioned that the church kitchen had been recently upgraded and sat unused most of the week. Cassie asked what it would take to use it. He told her $15 an hour, Tuesday and Thursday evenings. Leave it cleaner than she found it. She shook his hand before he finished the sentence. The church kitchen had 2 ovens, 2 full-sized, properly calibrated ovens that did exactly what their dials said they would do. The first time she turned them both on and stood in the middle of the room with the heat building around her, she felt something she couldn't quite name. Not happiness exactly, but the specific satisfaction of a problem that has been solved by the right tool. She expanded to 3 varieties. The original apple, a sweet potato that had been her mother's Sunday specialty, and a brown sugar pecan that she had been making from memory since she was 12 years old. She baked on Tuesdays and Thursdays. She sold on Saturdays. Week 1 at the new price point, $168 after costs. Week 2, $210. Week 3, $190. Because it rained and the market closed at 10, and she packed up in the wet with Noah asleep against her shoulder and drove home without complaint, because $200 was still $200. Week 4, $260. Week 5, $310. She had started taking pre-orders from regulars who had begun arriving before the market officially opened. Week 6, $420. She added the 6 weeks together on the back of a grocery receipt in the car outside the lawyer's office. The total was $1,478 more than she needed. She went inside and handed Patricia a cashier's check. Patricia's assistant stamped it received at 4:52 in the afternoon. The office closed at 5. She drove home at 5:03 with empty hands and a lighter chest. On the passenger seat, the recipe book sat open to the first page. She didn't remember opening it. She started checking the locks twice, then 3 times. Then she stopped sleeping. It had started small, the way these things always start. A detail that didn't quite fit filed away in the back of the mind, because there was always something more pressing to deal with, and the mind can only hold so much at once before it starts making choices about what to set down. A comment her lawyer made during a phone call in the 3rd week after the custody petition was filed. Patricia had called to go over Kyle's amended filing a document that had arrived with a new set of specifics. The exact hours Cassie spent at the church kitchen on Tuesday and Thursday evenings, the average number of pies she produced per week, the name of the market manager at Market Square, the vendor fee she paid each Saturday. He has details, Patricia said, more than you'd expect from someone who's been uninvolved. Cassie had said she didn't know where he was getting them. That was true when she said it. She filed it in the back of her mind and moved on, because Noah had a school project due, and the sweet potato pies were not going to make themselves. The second detail came from Barbara. Barbara had become a regular. She came most Saturdays now, sometimes alone, and sometimes with a colleague from the school where she taught, and she had the particular loyalty of a customer who feels personally invested in a business's success, which Cassie had come to appreciate more than she knew how to say. On a Saturday in the 6th week, while Cassie was boxing up the last of the pre-orders, Barbara mentioned, in the casual way that people mention things they think you probably already know, that someone had been asking about her. Asking how, Cassie said. Questions, Barbara said. How long you'd been at the market, whether you had any other locations, how often you changed your setup. I thought it was just someone curious about starting their own thing. She paused. But they also asked what time you usually arrived and what time you usually left. That part felt a little different. Cassie asked what the person looked like. Barbara described a woman. Mid-50s, gray hair, canvas jacket. Cassie finished boxing the pre-orders without saying anything else. She drove home, through a part of the city she didn't usually drive through. Not for any reason she could have articulated, just because she needed the extra minutes and the movement, and the particular way that driving at night made it possible to think without the thinking feeling like too much. She went over what she knew. Kyle's attorney had details that were too specific to be guessed. Someone had been asking questions at the market about her schedule. The description Barbara had given matched one person. She told herself there could be another explanation. She thought about the Tuesday and Thursday evenings. Diane arrived at 5:30. Cassie left for the church kitchen. Diane was alone in the apartment with Noah and with Cassie's calendar on the refrigerator and Cassie's schedule written on the whiteboard beside the phone, and Cassie's pre-order list on the kitchen counter, and the vendor confirmation emails printed and stacked on the table, because Cassie was the kind of person who printed things out. She thought about the key on the plain metal ring. She pulled into the parking lot of her building and sat in the car for a few minutes without moving. The building was quiet. The lights in Unit 7 were off. She looked at them for a moment, then looked away. Inside, she checked the front door lock. She checked it again. She went to the back window and checked that latch, then the bathroom window, then the bedroom window. She stood in the hallway between the two bedrooms and listened to the building settle around her, and told herself that she was tired, and that tired people find patterns in things that aren't patterns, and that this was a known feature of the human mind, and not evidence of anything. She called Patricia the next morning. She did not say Diana's name. She said that she thought someone in her personal circle might be sharing information with Kyle's side, and asked what Patricia recommended. Patricia was quiet for a moment, the specific quiet of someone recalibrating. Then she said to be careful about what information she left visible in shared spaces, to consider changing the details of her schedule where possible, and to document anything that felt relevant. "Don't confront anyone," Patricia said. "Not yet. You don't have anything solid." Cassie said she understood. She changed the whiteboard beside the phone to a small notebook she kept in her jacket pocket. She moved the pre-order list from the counter to a folder in her bedroom closet. She started texting her schedule to herself, instead of writing it where anyone walking through the kitchen could read it. She did not say anything to Diane. Diane continued to arrive on Tuesdays and Thursdays. She continued to be exactly what she had always been: practical, steady, good with Noah, undemanding. She made tea and sat in the armchair and asked no questions that weren't her business. She was the same person she had always been. And Cassie sat across from her on the evenings she was home and watched her, and could find nothing that confirmed what she was afraid of, and nothing that ruled it out. That was the hardest part. Not the suspicion itself, but the inability to resolve it. The not knowing sat inside her chest like something with weight pressing on the underside of her ribs when she breathed. She told herself she was being paranoid. She told herself that Diane had been nothing but kind and consistent, and that she was taking the stress of the custody case and projecting it onto the person closest to her, because that was what stress did to people who were already carrying too much. She believed about half of that. But that night, after Noah was asleep, she went to the kitchen counter and picked up the recipe book and carried it down the hall to her bedroom and put it in the drawer of the nightstand beside her bed. She told herself it was just easier to reach from there. She told herself she was being paranoid. But that night, she moved the recipe book from the kitchen counter to the drawer beside her bed. He came every Saturday. He bought 2 slices. He never said more than 4 words. The first time she noticed him was on a Saturday in late April, the 5th week at the market. He appeared at the edge of her table during the mid-morning rush, when the line had 3 people in it, and Noah was restocking the napkin holder. And Cassie was simultaneously making change and answering a question about whether the brown sugar pecan contained tree nuts. He waited without impatience, which already set him apart from most people in a line. When it was his turn, he looked at the 3 varieties on the table with the focused attention of someone who was actually looking, not just deciding between two options he had already half chosen. He pointed at the apple. 2 slices, he said. She boxed them. He paid in cash, exact change, folded once. He took the box. He nodded once, not a social nod, not the nod of a man performing friendliness, but the nod of a person who has completed a transaction and is acknowledging it. Then he walked away toward the far end of the market and did not look back. That was all. She forgot about him, almost immediately, because there were 4 more people in line, and Noah had spilled the napkins, and the woman at the end wanted to know if she took cards. He came back the following Saturday. Same time, same spot, at the edge of her table, same focused look at the 3 varieties. This time, he chose the sweet potato. 2 slices cash, exact change, 1 nod. Gone. He came the Saturday after that, and the one after that. By the 6th week of his appearing, Cassie had started to notice the pattern, the way you notice something that repeats not with alarm, just with the quiet acknowledgement that this is a thing that happens now. He was somewhere in his mid-40s, she guessed, with the kind of face that was difficult to read. Not because it was blank, but because it was settled, the face of a man who had decided a long time ago what he thought about most things, and didn't feel the need to advertise it. He wore unremarkable clothes. He carried nothing but his wallet. He arrived at roughly the same time each week, and he left in the same direction, and she never saw him stop at any other table. She mentioned him to Diane one Tuesday evening in the offhand way that you mention something you find mildly interesting and nothing more. Diane looked up from her tea. Same man, every week, cash, no conversation, Diane said. Every Saturday for 6 weeks, Cassie said. Diane considered this with the expression she wore when she was thinking something she hadn't decided whether to say yet. Then she said, men like that don't just buy pie. Cassie didn't know what that meant and didn't ask. She had other things to think about. The 7th Saturday, he arrived at his usual time and bought his usual 2 slices of apple and took them to the low wall at the edge of the market square, where a few other people sat eating things they had just purchased. He sat down and opened the box. He ate the first slice in the way he always paid efficiently, without ceremony. Then he picked up the second slice and took a bite and stopped. Not stopped eating. Stopped in the way a person stops when something has interrupted a thought they were having, when something external has reached in and rearranged the furniture in a room they believed they knew the layout of. He sat very still for a moment. He looked at the slice in his hand. He looked at it with an expression that Cassie, watching from behind her table, could not fully interpret something between recognition and something older than recognition, something that belonged to a part of a person that doesn't have a clean name. He finished the slice slowly. He folded the box closed and stood and walked back to her table. There was a short line. He waited. When he reached the front, he did not ask for more pie. He stood at the edge of the table and looked at her with the same settled expression he always wore. And then he said, "This tastes like something I haven't had since I was a kid." He said it the way you state a fact about the weather. Not as a compliment, not as a question. As an observation that he apparently felt needed to be made and that he was making without expectation of a particular response. Cassie said, "Thank you." He nodded. He left. She watched him go. He walked to the far end of the market, the way he always did, without hurrying, and turned the corner at the edge of the square, and was gone. Noah came to stand beside her and looked in the direction the man had walked. "Who's that?" Noah asked. "I don't know," she said. "He comes every week," Noah said, with the matter-of-fact observation of a child who notices patterns as naturally as breathing. "I know," she said. "Does he have a name?" "I don't know that either." Noah considered this for a moment, then went back to the napkin holder, apparently satisfied that some things simply were what they were. The following Monday, Cassie drove to the church kitchen for a Tuesday prep session, made a grocery list for the week, helped Noah with a reading assignment that involved a story about a boy who found a lost dog, and went to bed at 10:15. On Tuesday morning, she checked her messages before getting up the way she had started doing since the custody filing, because Patricia had asked her to stay on top of any correspondence that came in. There was an email that had arrived the previous evening at 7:42. The sender name read Marcus T. Webb. She did not recognize it. She almost deleted it. She opened it instead. His title listed below his name in the signature line read Regional Buyer Target Corporation. 3 days later, an email arrived. Marcus T. Webb, Regional Buyer Target Corporation. She read the email 4 times before she believed it was real. The first time she read it, the way you read something unexpected, fast surface level, looking for the thing that will tell you it's not what it appears to be. A scam, a mistake, someone with a similar name at a different company. The second time she read it more slowly, looking for the same thing and not finding it. The third time she read it word by word, the way Patricia read legal documents. Because if something was going to turn out to be wrong, she wanted to find it herself before it found her. The fourth time she read it because she needed to read it one more time. It was real. Marcus T. Webb, regional buyer for a major national retail chain based out of Minneapolis, was writing to inform her that he had been sampling her product at the Market Square Farmers Market over the past several weeks, and that he believed it met the criteria for consideration under their Small Business Supplier Program. The program was designed to identify independently operated food businesses with retail potential. He was inviting her to a formal presentation at the regional office. He had listed a date. He had listed what she would need to bring. He had included a direct phone number. She sat at the kitchen table with Noah's cereal bowl still on the counter and the morning light coming through the window at the low angle it came through in early June. And she looked at the phone number for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and dialed. He answered on the second ring. The way people answer when they are expecting a call they have already decided to take. His voice was the same as she remembered from the market. Not warm exactly, but not cold either. Simply direct, the voice of a man who had a great deal to do and had learned to say what he meant without spending extra words on it. He thanked her for calling back. He said he would explain what the program involved and what she would need to prepare, and he asked if she had something to write with. She had the small notebook from her jacket pocket. She opened it to a blank page. He spoke for 11 minutes. She wrote without interrupting. The program was straightforward, in the way that things are straightforward. When you are on the outside of them, a supplier presents their product at a regional review. The buyer evaluates it against a standard set of criteria. And if it moves forward, the chain places an initial order for a defined number of locations. Small entry point, he said. Proof of concept before any significant volume commitment. What she would need, he explained, was retail-ready packaging, not plastic bags with handwritten labels, but printed packaging with a logo, a nutrition panel, an ingredient list, and a scannable product code. She would need documentation of her production facility and its certification status. She would need proof of liability coverage for a food business. She would need a food handler certification. And she would need to demonstrate that she had or could access the production capacity to fulfill a regional order which he defined as several hundred units per week on a consistent basis. He said all of this in the same tone he had used to tell her that her pie tasted like something from his childhood, factual, unhurried, without drama. Each item landed in her notebook like a stone dropped into still water, the ripples spreading outward before the next one hit. Retail packaging. She had Ziploc bags and a label maker, a scannable product code. She did not know what that cost or how long it took. Production capacity for several hundred units per week. She was making roughly 40 pies a week out of a church kitchen on 2 evenings. She wrote it all down. She did not ask questions, not because she didn't have them, but because she needed to understand the full shape of what she was looking at before she could ask the right ones, and she hadn't seen the full shape yet. When he finished, he asked if she had any questions. She said she would follow up by email. He said that was fine. He said he looked forward to hearing from her. The call ended. She set the phone on the table. She sat for a moment in the particular silence that follows a conversation that has changed the dimensions of a room without moving any of the furniture. The cereal bowl was still on the counter. The morning light was still coming through the window at its low June angle. Everything was exactly where it had been 20 minutes ago, and none of it looked quite the same. She opened her calendar on her phone. She found the date Marcus had given her for the presentation and looked at it for a moment. Then she scrolled to the week surrounding it and looked at the other things she had written there. She looked at the presentation date. She looked at the date Patricia had given her for the custody hearing, written in the same week 2 days earlier. She sat with that for a long time. Then she got up and went to the bedroom and opened the drawer beside her bed and took out the recipe book. She carried it back to the kitchen table and opened it to the first page, where her mother's handwriting said the 4 things it had always said. She turned past the first page to the inside of the back cover, where there was a small blank space she had always left empty without knowing why. She wrote the date of the custody hearing. Below it, she wrote the date of the presentation. Both dates, same page. Below her mother's handwriting. She looked at them for a moment. Then she closed the book. She didn't make a list. Not yet. A UPC barcode costs $250. A food handler certification costs $15 and takes 4 hours on a Tuesday afternoon at the kitchen table while your son does homework across from you and occasionally asks questions about the difference between a danger zone temperature and a regular temperature and whether cookies count as a potentially hazardous food. A broken heart costs nothing and takes everything. She made the list the morning after she closed the recipe book. She made it on a fresh page of the small notebook, and this time she did not stop herself. Retail packaging, product code registration, food handler certification, commercial kitchen documentation, liability to insurance, co-packer research. Each item was a problem she had not solved yet, and she had learned over the last 18 months that the best thing to do with a list of unsolved problems was to look at them directly and start with the one on the left. She started with the certification because it was the cheapest and the fastest, and because beginning with something completable reminded her brain that completion was possible. The food handler course was online, offered through a state-approved provider, whose website looked like it had not been updated since Noah was in diapers, but whose content was thorough and whose certificate printed cleanly at the library on Sutherland Avenue. 4 hours, $15 one laminated sheet of paper that said she understood the principles of safe food handling and had been assessed and found competent. She put it in the folder she had bought at the dollar store and labeled with a strip of masking tape. The folder went into the tote bag she was beginning to think of as the business bag because it needed a name that was separate from the rest of her life. The packaging took longer. She found a designer through an online platform that connected freelancers with small businesses, a woman based in Nashville who had done packaging work before and who responded to Cassie's inquiry within 4 hours with a portfolio and a rate of $120 for a complete package design. Cassie sent her the recipe book page. Her mother had written on a photograph of 3 finished pies on the cooling rack and 4 words she wanted on the front of every bag. From our kitchen table. The designer sent a proof 6 days later. It was simple and warm, cream background, hand-lettered font. A small illustration of a pie with steam rising from the vents in the crust. It looked like something that belonged on a shelf. It looked like something a person would pick up. Cassie approved it in the same email she used to ask about the turnaround time for a print run of 500 units. The UPC code required registering through a national product identification organization, which she found through a digital search at the library. $250 for a single product code, which would allow her product to be scanned at any retail checkout in the country. She paid it with the debit card attached to the business account she had opened in April and sat in the library parking lot afterward, thinking about what $250 had bought her. A number 12 digits, the thing that made the difference between something you sold at a table and something a scanner could read. The co-packer was the hardest problem. She needed a licensed production facility that could fulfill several hundred units per week using her recipe. She called 4 facilities in the greater Knoxville area over the course of a week. The first had a minimum order requirement she couldn't meet. The second had a setup fee that was more than her monthly rent. The third and fourth did not return her calls. She was on her way back from the church kitchen on a Thursday night, the business bag on the passenger seat and Noah asleep in the back, when she remembered something Reverend Cole had said 3 weeks earlier about a congregant who ran a small, licensed bakery out of a facility in Maryville, 20 minutes south of the city. She pulled into a gas station and wrote the name down on the back of a receipt. The woman's name was Gloria, and her facility had 2 production lines and a staff of 7, and a relationship with the state health department that was current and documented. She agreed to a trial run of 200 units using Cassie's recipe at a per-unit cost that was workable if the retail price point held. They shook hands in the parking lot of Gloria's facility on a Wednesday morning while Noah sat on the hood of the car, eating a granola bar and kicking his heels against the bumper. Through all of it, Diane came on Tuesdays and Thursdays. She came the same way she had always come, 5:30. Canvas jacket, cup of tea, she made herself from the tin on the second shelf. She watched Noah do his homework and read in the armchair, and was exactly what she had always been. And Cassie left for the church kitchen on those evenings, and came back at 10 or 10:30, and found the apartment quiet, and Noah asleep, and the dishes done, and Diane's teacup rinsed and on the rack. She had not changed anything about the arrangement. Patricia had told her not to, because changing it without explanation would signal that she knew something, and signaling that she knew something would complicate what was already complicated enough. So she said nothing. She left at 5:30. She came home at 10. She kept her schedule in the notebook in her jacket pocket, and she did not write it on the whiteboard or leave it on the counter as such, and she told herself that was enough. Patricia called on a Thursday morning in the 4th week of the 6th. She said Kyle's legal team had submitted supplemental evidence, a series of photographs taken by a private investigator over the previous month. Cassie arriving at the church kitchen at 6 in the evening. Cassie leaving at 11:40. Cassie carrying boxes to her car on a Saturday morning at 5:15, while Noah sat in the back seat. One photograph time-stamped of Cassie at a gas station on a Tuesday night, Noah visible through the rear window, taken while she was inside paying for gas for approximately 9 minutes. He's going to argue you're placing your business ahead of your child's stability, Patricia said. The late nights, the early mornings. He's building a picture, Cassie said. The picture isn't accurate. I know that, Patricia said. But we need to show the court that, not just tell them. After the call ended, Cassie sat at the kitchen table and opened the small notebook to the page where she tracked the baking schedule. She looked at the dates the photographs had been taken, the ones Patricia had listed, Tuesdays and Thursdays. She stared at the dates for a long time. Then she looked at her calendar. Then she looked away. Diane had left her phone on the kitchen counter. It was a mistake. It was the only mistake she made in 18 months. The apartment was quiet, in the way it got quiet after 10. On a weeknight, Noah asleep down the hall. The refrigerator doing its low, steady work. The street outside settling into the particular stillness of a neighborhood that had decided it was done for the day. Diane had left 20 minutes earlier, same as always, jacket on, keys in hand, a brief word about Noah's spelling test on Friday. The door had closed behind her with its usual soft click. Cassie had been standing at the sink, rinsing the last of the evening's dishes, when she saw it. A phone, face up on the counter beside the dish rack screen, dark, sitting in the exact spot where a phone gets set down by someone who is doing something else and intends to pick it up again, and then forgets because the jacket is on and the keys are in hand and the door is already open. She dried her hands. She picked it up, meaning to call her own number. Let it ring once. Diane would be at the end of the hall, maybe already at the elevator. Simple. The screen lit the moment she touched it. A message preview appeared at the top. The name above it was one she knew. Not a contact she expected to see on Diane's phone. Not a name that had any business being there. 3 words of preview text, visible before the screen, required a passcode she didn't have. 3 words were enough. She set the phone down on the counter. She stood very still. The refrigerator hummed. The street was quiet. Down the hall, Noah made the small, shifting sound he made when he turned over in his sleep, the sound she had memorized without meaning to, the way you memorize the specific sounds of the people you are responsible for. She picked the phone up again. The screen was still lit. The message preview was still there. She looked at it for a long time, at the name above it, at the 3 words below it, and she thought about Tuesdays and Thursdays, and the photographs Patricia had described, and the custody filing that always seemed to know exactly where to press. She thought about the key on the plain metal ring that she had placed in Diane's hand on a Friday night 8 months ago, because it had felt like the right thing to do. She set the phone down again. She took a breath. She picked it up a 3rd time, and this time she did not set it down. She could not access the full conversation, but the preview of each new incoming message showed the first line before the screen locked, and she stood at the counter for a long time, setting the phone down and picking it up each time a new message loaded from the cache, reading the fragments, the way you piece together something that has been torn wholly with the specific dread of a person who already knows what the whole picture looks like before the last piece is in place. It was enough. By the time she had seen enough to understand the shape of what had been happening, she had been standing at the counter for 40 minutes. Her feet were cold. The dish towel was still in her hand, folded into a tight rectangle, the way her hands had gone on doing something purposeful, while the rest of her was somewhere else entirely. She did not cry. She had done a great deal of crying in the years before she left Kyle Drummond's house. And somewhere in that process, she had used up a reserve of something that did not refill quickly. What she felt now was not grief exactly. It was closer to the feeling of stepping on a stair that isn't there. The lurch, the recalibration, the body adjusting to a floor that is lower than expected. She set the phone on the counter. She set the dish towel beside it. She went to the stove and turned on the oven. The dial clicked. The interior light came on. She stood in front of it for a moment, with her hands at her sides, while the coils began to warm. Then she went to the bedroom and opened the drawer beside her bed and took out the recipe book. She brought it back to the kitchen and opened it to the pie section and found the page she had made so many times she no longer needed to read it, and she began. She measured by feel, the way her mother had measured, and the way her mother's hands had taught her hands to measure without a scale and without hesitation. She browned the butter in the small saucepan and watched it shift from yellow to gold to the color of late afternoon light. And she pulled it at the exact right moment, the way she always pulled it, because some things you learn so completely that they stop being knowledge and become instinct. She worked in the yellow light of the kitchen for 2 hours. She did not think about the phone on the counter, or rather, she thought about it the way you think about something that is too large to look at directly in pieces at angles, while your hands were doing something else, and the oven was warm, and the kitchen smelled the way it always smelled when she was making something that mattered. At midnight, she wiped down the counter and opened her laptop. She found the email from Marcus Webb and hit reply. She wrote 4 sentences. She confirmed her attendance at the presentation. She confirmed the date. She confirmed she would have everything he had asked for. She thanked him for the opportunity, without making it sound like gratitude was the most important thing she had to say. Because it wasn't. She hit send at 12:47 in the morning. She closed the laptop and looked at the pie cooling on the rack. The crust was even. The edges were exactly where they were supposed to be. She had made it in the dark in a kitchen on the night before the hardest day of the last 18 months, and it had come out right because that was what happened when you had made something. Enough times it came out right, even when everything else wasn't. She looked at the recipe book open on the counter. She looked at her mother's handwriting on the page. She said quietly to no one in the room, "Mom, I need this one." She turned off the kitchen light. She lay down on top of the covers in her bedroom, without changing her clothes, the way you lie down when you are not sure sleep is something your body is going to agree to. At 3 in the morning, a car pulled up to the curb outside. She heard it through the window, the engine cutting the sudden absence of sound where sound had been. She lay still. The room was dark. She did not go to the window. She counted. At 11 minutes, the engine turned over again. The car pulled away. She listened to it go. She lay in the dark and listened to it go until there was nothing left to hear. The courtroom smelled like carpet cleaner and old coffee and the specific anxiety of people who needed something from a stranger in a robe. She had not slept. She had not expected to. She had lain on top of the covers until 4:30 and then gotten up and showered and dressed in the dark and driven Noah to her neighbor, Mrs. Pacheco's apartment on the second floor, where he would spend the day and where Mrs. Pacheco would give him oatmeal and not ask questions that weren't her business, because Mrs. Pacheco was that kind of person. And Cassie had come to understand that those kinds of people were rarer and more valuable than almost anything else in the world. Patricia was already in the hallway outside courtroom 4 when Cassie arrived. She was wearing her gray suit and her reading glasses on their chain and carrying a folder that was significantly thicker than the one she had been carrying at their last meeting. She looked at Cassie the way she always looked at her, quickly, assessing without making the assessment obvious, and said, "You look like you didn't sleep." "I didn't," Cassie said. "That's all right," Patricia said. "You don't need to look rested. You need to look like someone who runs a legitimate business and takes her responsibilities seriously." She paused. "Which you are and do. So that part should be manageable." They went inside. The courtroom was smaller than Cassie had expected, though she didn't know what she had expected exactly. Something from television. Probably something with higher ceilings and more gravity. This room had drop ceilings and fluorescent lighting, and 2 tables facing a raised bench and a row of chairs along the side wall. For observers, all of them empty today, because this was not the kind of hearing that drew an audience. It was the kind that happened in a small room on a Monday morning between people who used to share a last name and now shared nothing but a 6-year-old boy and a disagreement about what was best for him. She did not look at the other table when she sat down. Patricia spread her documents in the precise way she spread everything, methodically, with a specific place for each item, nothing overlapping. She leaned over and said quietly, "When he presents you, look at the judge." Not at him, not at his attorney, the judge. Cassie nodded. Kyle Drummond came in 2 minutes before the scheduled start time. She did not look up when the door opened. She heard the sound of a chair pulling back at the other table, the settling of someone sitting down, the brief murmur of his attorney saying something close to his ear. She kept her eyes on the folder in front of her. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Everyone sat. Kyle's attorney went first. He was a deliberate man who spoke in the measured cadence of someone who had learned that pace communicated confidence, and he laid out the argument the way Patricia had described it, methodically, without excess. His client had concerns about the stability of the current custodial environment. The mother had left steady employment. Her income derived entirely from the sale of homemade food products at weekend markets. The hours required by this operation placed the child in irregular situations, late nights, early mornings, extended periods, in a vehicle while the mother conducted business. He submitted the photographs. Cassie looked at the judge. The judge was a woman in her 60s, with close-cropped white hair and the particular stillness of someone who had been listening to people explain their choices for a very long time and had stopped being surprised by most of them. She looked at each photograph without expression. Kyle's attorney concluded. The judge made a note. Patricia stood. She did not raise her voice. She did not use the word remarkable or extraordinary, or any of the other words people use when they are trying to make something sound like more than it is. She said that her client had, over the course of 18 months, built a licensed food business from a home kitchen with minimal starting capital. She submitted the Tennessee Food Handler Certification. She submitted the business registration documents. She submitted 18 months of bank statements showing a consistent and growing revenue line. She submitted the email confirmation from the regional buyer for a major national retail chain, expressing intent to place an initial order across 40 locations, contingent on the outcome of a formal presentation scheduled for later in the week. She said that the photographs submitted by opposing counsel showed a woman working, that working at night was not evidence of instability, that the child in question was in each instance either asleep, supervised, or in the direct care of his mother. That the question before the court was not whether this woman worked hard, but whether her child was cared for, and that the answer to that question was documented, consistent, and not in reasonable dispute. She sat down. The judge looked at both tables for a moment. Then she said she wanted 30 days to review the full record before issuing a ruling. She set the date. She thanked both parties. She left. That was all. The room reorganized itself. The way rooms do after the formal part is over papers, gathered folders, closed, chairs pushed back. Patricia touched Cassie's arm briefly and said, "That went as well as it could have gone today." She said it the way she said everything, without inflation, which meant Cassie believed her. She gathered her things. She stood. She walked toward the door. Kyle was ahead of her, in the aisle, between the tables and the door. His attorney had stopped to speak with someone near the back wall. Kyle walked alone. He reached the door first and pushed it open and stepped through without holding it, and Cassie caught it behind him with her hand and followed him into the hallway. He did not turn around. He walked 4 steps into the hallway, and then he stopped. She came through the door, and he was standing there, his back still to her. And for a moment, neither of them moved. Then he turned his head slightly. Not enough to look at her directly, just enough for his voice to carry. He said, "See you in 30 days." He said it quietly, without heat, the way you state a fact about something that has already been decided. Then he walked away down the hallway and turned the corner and was gone. Cassie stood in the courthouse hallway with her folder under her arm and the fluorescent lights overhead and the sound of other people's business coming from behind other closed doors. And she stood there for a moment because her legs had decided they needed a moment before they were going to do anything else. Then she took a breath. Then she walked to the elevator and pressed the button and waited because there was a presentation in Minneapolis in 4 days and 300 units to pack before Thursday morning, and a 6-year-old at Mrs. Pacheco's apartment who was going to want to know how her day had gone. It sounded like a promise. She drove 8 hours because she couldn't afford to fly and because she needed the time to remember who she was. She left Knoxville at 5:15 on Wednesday morning. Noah was at Mrs. Pacheco's for the night. The car held 3 dozen sample units in the new packaging, the business folder in the passenger footwell, and the recipe book on the seat beside her. Not in the bag, not in the back, but there where she could see it. She had not planned that. She had picked it up from the nightstand on her way out and set it on the seat without deciding to the way you reach for certain things, without consulting the part of yourself that makes decisions. She did not listen to the radio. She had learned over the last 18 months that silence was where you found out what you actually thought, as opposed to what you had been thinking around. Somewhere around the Kentucky border, she decided that the story was the presentation. She had no slides, no printed charts, no branded materials. She had a box of pies and a folder of documents and the story of how they came to exist. Anything else would be a layer between the thing itself and the person evaluating it, and she was done with layers. The Target regional office was a low building on the west side of Minneapolis that looked like every other building in every other corporate park. Gray glass, a logo above the entrance, a parking lot 3/4 full. She had slept 4 hours in the reclined driver's seat at a rest area outside Madison jacket over her shoulders, and she felt, if not rested, then present. That would have to be enough. The conference room on the 2nd floor was small. A table, 3 chairs on one side, one on the other, a pitcher of water, a window onto the parking lot. Marcus Webb was already seated. He looked the same as he had at the market, same settled expression, same quality of stillness. He stood when she entered, shook her hand, sat back down. He had a legal pad and a pen. He said, "Tell me about your product." She opened the box and set 3 packaged units on the table. The design was clean and warm, cream background, hand-lettered font, the words, "From our kitchen table," across the front. She pushed one toward him. Then she told him. She told him about the 4 lines her mother had written on the first page of the recipe book. About the morning she had opened it with almost nothing left and a boy who needed her to figure something out. About the first Saturday at the market, and Barbara and Noah's drawing, and the way word of mouth was not a strategy, but a consequence. About the church kitchen and Gloria in Maryville, and the trial run and breaking a sample in half, and knowing it was close enough to be worthy of the name on the bag. She told it the way it had actually happened, without making it smaller than it was, and without making it larger. He listened, without interrupting. When she finished, he picked up one of the packaged units, opened it, and ate a piece of pie, the way he always ate it, with the focused attention of someone actually tasting, not just sampling. He chewed slowly. He set the remainder down. He looked at the recipe book on the table beside the box, the faded cover, the cracked spine. He looked at it the way he had looked at the second slice of apple pie at the market 6 weeks ago, with something that was not quite recognition and not quite memory, but lived in the same part of a person as both. He said, "Where did your mother get this recipe?" The question landed differently than she expected. Not as a business question, as something coming from further back than the conversation currently underway. She told him. Her mother had made it her whole life, learned it from her own mother, written it down because she believed it was worth keeping. She had left the book to Cassie because she believed Cassie would know what to do with it. Marcus looked at the book for a moment. Then he looked at his legal pad and asked 4 questions. Shelf life, unit cost at scale, suggested retail production capacity. She answered each one with the numbers she had memorized because she had gone over them enough times that they lived in her now the way the recipe lived in her hands. He wrote each answer without reacting. Then he looked up. "We'll start with 40 stores in the Southeast," he said. "If it performs, we expand to the region." He said it the way he said everything, without drama, in a small room with a pitcher of water and a parking lot view. Cassie said, "Thank you." She stood. She gathered the box and the folder and picked up the recipe book. Marcus said, "Take care of yourself, Miss Drummond, and take care of that book." She looked at him. He had already looked back down at his legal pad. She walked out of the building and into the Minneapolis morning air cooler than Knoxville, and smelling like a city further north than she had ever lived. She stood beside her car with the recipe book against her chest and the sample box in her other hand. She didn't ask him why he had said that. Some things are not meant to be answered. They are meant to be carried. She drove 8 hours back with 40 stores in her chest and a custody hearing in 30 days. The return was different from the drive up the way. Returns are always different, same road, same distance, different weight. Going, she had needed the silence to think. Coming back, she needed it to stop thinking, which was harder. The 40 stores kept surfacing, rising up, through whatever else she tried to hold in her mind. Not as celebration, but as fact. The specific kind of fact that hasn't yet been absorbed, that the mind keeps returning to the way a tongue returns to a loose tooth, checking to see if it's still there, still real, still attached to something. It was still real. She crossed back into Tennessee just after 2 in the afternoon. The landscape changed the way it always changed coming south. The hills softer, the tree lines fuller, the light with a quality she had no precise word for, except familiar. She had not grown up in Knoxville. She had not grown up anywhere near it. But 14 months of mornings in the same apartment and the same kitchen and the same school 3 blocks away had done something to the way the city felt when she came back to it. And what it felt like, she realized, somewhere outside of Cookeville was home. She had not had that feeling about a place in a very long time. She picked Noah up from Mrs. Pacheco's at 4:30. He came down the hallway of the 2nd floor with his backpack and his bear and the slightly disheveled look of a child who had been having a reasonable time but was ready for his regular life to resume. He took her hand on the stairs without being asked, which he did sometimes and not others, and she did not comment on it because commenting on it would make him self-conscious, and the hand was too good a thing to risk. In the car, he buckled himself and settled his bear beside him and looked out the window for a moment. Then he said, "Did they like the pie?" She glanced at him in the rearview mirror. He was looking at the back of her headrest with the expression he wore when he was asking something he considered important. Not urgent, just important. the expression that meant he had been thinking about this and was now ready to hear the answer. She said, "They're going to put it in 40 stores." He was quiet for a moment. She watched him in the mirror. His face did the thing it did when he was processing a number, a slight narrowing of the eyes, a small adjustment of his head, as though he was turning the figure over to examine it from different angles. "Is that a lot?" he said. She thought about the conference room in Minneapolis. She thought about the small table and the pitcher of water, and Marcus Webb writing numbers on a legal pad without reacting to them. She thought about standing in the parking lot with the recipe book against her chest and the morning air that smelled like somewhere further north. "It's more than our kitchen," she said. Noah nodded. He accepted this the way he accepted most things. His mother told him completely, without requiring it to be larger than it was. He looked back out the window. After a moment, he said, "Can we have pie for dinner?" She said yes. At home, she put his backpack by the door and his bear on the couch and started water for pasta, because pie for dinner required something else alongside it, something that qualified as a meal, so she could tell herself she was feeding her child properly. While the water heated, she went to the bedroom and opened the nightstand drawer and took out the recipe book. She brought it to the kitchen table and sat down. She opened it to the first page and read the 4 lines her mother had written there, the ones she had read more times than she could count now, the ones that had started to feel less like instructions and more like a voice, specific and unhurried and still present in the way that certain voices stay present long after the person is gone. "These are the things I know how to make. I hope you'll make them too. And when you don't know what to do next, make the pie." She sat with the 4 lines for a moment. Then she turned to the inside back cover, where she had written the 2 dates in the same week, the custody hearing and the Minneapolis presentation. Both dates in the same ink below her mother's handwriting on the same page. She looked at them. The presentation date had passed. She took the pen from the cup on the counter and uncapped it. Below the 2 dates in the small space remaining at the bottom of the page, she wrote 2 words. "For Noah." She looked at what she had written. 2 words. Below, 2 dates. Below 4 lines in her mother's hand. 3 generations of handwriting on the same page of the same book. Her mother's pencil above her own pen below. And between them, the distance of years and everything that had happened in those years and everything that had come from opening this book on a morning when she had almost nothing and a boy who needed her to figure something out. She closed the book. She got up and turned on the oven and took the butter from the refrigerator and began. Noah appeared in the kitchen doorway 20 minutes later, drawn by the smell, the way he was always drawn by the smell, and climbed onto the counter beside the stove, the way he had been climbing onto counters since he was old enough to manage it. He sat with his legs hanging over the edge and watched without speaking, because he had learned that the watching was enough, that you didn't need to narrate something that was already saying what it needed to say. The pie came out at 6:40. She cut 2 slices and put them on the table beside the pasta, and they ate together in the kitchen with the recipe book on the counter and the evening light coming through the window at the low angle. It came through in late June, and neither of them talked about Minneapolis or custody hearings or 40 stores, because none of that was what dinner was for. The Target contract arrived by email on Monday. She printed it at the library on Sutherland Avenue, signed it at the kitchen table with the pen from the cup on the counter, and scanned it back from the library machine that afternoon. Then she went home and made pie. There were still 30 days to go. The second hearing was quieter than the first. Kyle's lawyer had less to say. 30 days had passed, the way months pass, when every day inside them has something specific attached to it. Not quickly, not slowly, but fully. Each one used up before the next one began. She had baked 3 times a week and sold on Saturdays, and answered emails from Gloria about production timelines, and spoken to Patricia twice on the phone, and taken Noah to his school's end-of-year program, where he had stood on a small stage in the gymnasium and read 2 sentences about what he wanted to be when he grew up, which was, he had announced, into the microphone, with complete seriousness, a person who fixed things. She had not heard from Diane. She had not reached out. Neither had Diane. The silence between them had the particular quality of a silence that both parties understand, without discussing the kind that means the thing that needed to end has ended, and there is nothing useful to be said about it. Cassie had retrieved the spare key from the hook by her door, where Diane had returned it without a note, sometime in the week after the hearing, and put it in the kitchen drawer with the other things she was not ready to think about yet. She drove to the courthouse on a Monday morning in late July. Patricia was in the hallway, outside courtroom 4 again. Same gray suit, same folder, same reading glasses on their chain. She looked at Cassie and said, "You look better than last time." "I slept," Cassie said. Patricia nodded, as though sleep were a reasonable and responsible choice that she approved of. She opened the folder and showed Cassie the documents she had submitted to the court in the preceding week. The signed target vendor agreement, the business registration, the 18 months of bank statements, the food handler certification, the commercial kitchen rental agreement with Reverend Cole's church, Gloria's co-packing contract, the liability insurance certificate. Everything in order, everything documented, everything real. "He filed a response last Thursday," Patricia said. "His attorney challenged the sustainability of the business model, argued that a single retail contract with an unproven product in 40 stores does not constitute demonstrated financial stability." She paused. "It's not a strong argument, but it's the argument they had," Cassie said. "What do you think?" And Patricia said, "I think the judge read the file." They went inside. Kyle was already at the other table when they entered. He was sitting with his attorney, in a legal pad, and a bottle of water, and he looked the way he had looked in the hallway. After the first hearing, contained unrevealing, giving nothing away. He did not look up when Cassie came in. His attorney glanced over once and looked back at his notes. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Everyone sat. Kyle's attorney presented the response he had filed. He was shorter, this time more careful. The way lawyers are careful when they know the ground beneath them is less solid than they had hoped. He argued that a startup food business with a single retail contract represented an uncertain income stream, that the demands of scaling a production operation could further increase the irregular hours that had already been documented, that stability required more than a signed agreement with a large retailer. He sat down. Patricia stood. She submitted the signed vendor agreement. She submitted the 18-month revenue record, which showed consistent growth from a first-week total of $112 to a current weekly average of over $800. She submitted the co-packing agreement with Gloria's facility, which documented production capacity sufficient to fulfill the target order and maintain existing market sales simultaneously. She submitted a one-page letter from Reverend Cole, written on church letterhead in his steady, unhurried hand, attesting to Cassie's use of the facility over the preceding year and characterizing her as reliable, professional, and conscientious. She did not editorialize. She submitted the record and let it speak. She sat down. The judge looked at the documents for several minutes. The courtroom was quiet in the particular way that courtrooms are quiet when the person with the authority to decide something is in the process of deciding it. A listening quiet, a waiting quiet. The quiet of people who understand that the next sound that matters will not come from them. The judge looked up. She said that having reviewed the complete record, she found the current custodial arrangement to be in the best interest of the child. She said that the documentation submitted demonstrated a pattern of responsible financial management and consistent provision for the child's needs. She said that the evidence did not support the petitioner's claim of an unstable custodial environment. She said that the petition for modification was denied. She set down her pen. She looked at both tables one more time with the expression of a woman who had seen a great many of these and knew that the paperwork was only part of what was actually happening in the room. Then she gathered her papers and left. The room shifted. Patricia squeezed Cassie's arm once briefly and began gathering her folder with the efficient movements of someone who had been here before and knew what came after. Across the table, Kyle's attorney said something close to his ear. Kyle did not respond. He looked at the table in front of him for a moment, then pushed back his chair and stood. He signed the final documents, where his attorney indicated, without reading them, the way a person signs things when the reading is no longer the point. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. He walked to the door without looking at the other table. The door opened, the door closed. Patricia said, "It's done." Cassie sat for a moment in the chair she had sat in for 2 hearings, in this small fluorescent room that smelled like carpet cleaner and the specific weight of other people's unresolved things. She sat and let it be done, the way you let something be done, when you have been working toward it for long enough that the arrival of it takes a moment to feel real. Then she stood up. She thanked Patricia. She shook her hand. She walked out of the courthouse into the July heat, which hit her at the door with the full force of a Tennessee summer afternoon, and she stood on the steps for a moment with her face turned up toward it. She picked up Noah from school at 3 o'clock, the same as every day. She bought him ice cream first. Then she told him. 3 months later, on a Saturday, Cassie drove to the Target on Kingston Pike. It was the kind of Saturday, that late October, produced in Knoxville, cool enough for a jacket, bright enough that the light had a particular clarity to it, the kind of day that felt clean, in a way that summer days rarely did. Noah was in the passenger seat, wearing his jacket unzipped and eating the last of a granola bar, and watching the passing storefronts with the mild interest of a child who is comfortable with wherever he is going because he trusts the person taking him there. She had not told him where they were going specifically. She had said they were running an errand. He had accepted this without follow-up questions, which was one of the things about Noah that she had come to appreciate more. As he got older, he did not need to know everything in advance. He was willing to wait and see, and he brought to that waiting a quality of patience that she was fairly certain he had not inherited from her. She parked in the lot, and they went in through the main entrance, past the carts and the greeter, in the opening expanse of the store, with its wide aisles and its overhead lighting and its particular smell of something between new plastic and climate control that was the same in every location she had ever been in. Noah zipped his jacket once inside because the air conditioning was still running at a level that suggested the building had not fully committed to the change of season. They walked. She did not go directly to the aisle. She went through produce first, past the bread section, past the display of seasonal items, near the front, that had been restocked with fall things, small decorative gourds and cinnamon-scented candles, and a bin of apple varieties with hand-lettered signs. Noah stopped to read the sign for the Honey Crisp apples and sounded out the word with the focused effort of a child for whom the act of reading was still something that required the full cooperation of the mouth. "Honey Crisp," he said, satisfied. "Good," she said. They moved on. She had checked the store layout online the night before. Sitting at the kitchen table after Noah was asleep, the laptop open next to the recipe book that now lived on the counter, again returned from the nightstand drawer sometime in August, when the reason for moving it had resolved itself and the counter was where it belonged. She had found the aisle number and the approximate shelf location and had closed the laptop and sat for a while in the quiet kitchen thinking about what it would look like and finding that she could not quite picture it, not fully, even though she had approved the packaging herself and seen the proof and signed off on the print run. Some things you have to stand in front of. Aisle 7 was in the center of the store, flanked by snack items on one side and specialty food products on the other. The aisle was wide and well lit and smelled faintly of the coffee section 2 rows over. She turned into it and walked slowly, reading the shelf markers the way you read addresses when you are looking for a specific number, not taking in everything, just looking for the one. Shelf 3 was at eye level. She stopped, there between a well-known national brand whose packaging she had seen on grocery shelves her entire life, and a store brand product in plain white packaging was a small, neat unit, cream background, hand-lettered font, a small illustration of a pie with careful steam lines rising from the vents in the crust. The words, "From our kitchen table across the front." She stood and looked at it. She had approved every element of that design. She had seen it on screen and on proof paper, and on the finished units she had packed into boxes herself in Gloria's facility in Maryville. She knew exactly what it looked like. And yet, standing here in the middle of aisle 7 of this particular store on Kingston Pike on a Saturday morning in late October, with the overhead lights and the coffee smell and the sound of other people's carts somewhere behind her, it looked different than it had looked in any of those other contexts. It looked like it belonged there, not like it had been placed there by someone who had worked very hard to get it there, though that was also true. It looked like a thing that had always been on its way to this shelf, the way certain things feel inevitable in retrospect, even when nothing about them was inevitable at the time. Noah had been walking slightly ahead of her, reading the shelf markers the way he had read the Apple sign. He stopped when she stopped. He looked at the shelf. He looked at where she was looking. He stepped forward and looked more closely at the packaging. The way he looked closely at things that interested him, leaning in slightly, eyes moving across the details, the small illustration, the words. His hand came up and touched the edge of the package on the shelf. Not picking it up, just touching it the way you touch something to confirm it is real. He said, "That's our name." She looked at him. The label read in small type below the product name, "A family recipe passed down." She had written that line herself in the email to the designer because she had not been able to think of a better way to say what it was. "That's your grandmother's recipe," she said. Noah looked at the package for another moment. He looked at the name. He looked at the illustration of the pie. He looked at the words, "From our kitchen table" in the font the designer in Nashville had chosen, because it looked like handwriting without being precious about it. He looked at all of it, the way children look at things that connect to something larger than they can fully articulate, yet with a seriousness that is not sad and not celebratory, but simply present, simply the face of a person standing at the edge of something they understand to be important, even if they cannot yet say exactly why. He turned to her. "Can we get one?" he asked. She looked at him. She looked at the package on the shelf. She thought about the recipe book on the counter at home, with 3 generations of handwriting inside it, and the pie in the refrigerator she had made Thursday evening, and the kitchen that smelled when she was working in it, like the specific combination of butter and warmth and something older than either of them. "We have the real thing at home," she said. She held out her hand. He took it. "Come on," she said. They walked back through the store, the way they had come, past the seasonal display, with its gourds and candles, past the bread section, past produce, where the Honeycrisp apples sat in their bin, with the hand-lettered sign that Noah had already read and did not need to read again. Out through the main entrance into the October air, which was cool and bright and smelled like the particular cleanness of a day that had been a good one. Cassie Drummond started with $14.22, a 6-year-old son, and a pie recipe her mother left behind. 2 years later, her product was on the shelf of 40 stores across the Southeast, produced weekly at a licensed facility in Maryville, Tennessee, packaged in a design that a woman in Nashville made for $120, carrying a product code that cost $250 to register, and that allowed any scanner in any store in the country to read what it was and where it came from. This is not a fairy tale. This is what it actually took. It took the Tennessee Cottage Food Law, which allows residents to prepare and sell certain homemade food products directly to consumers without a commercial kitchen license, with a ceiling of $25,000 in annual revenue, and a requirement to label every unit with the ingredients, the producer's name and address, and the statement that it was made in a home kitchen, not inspected by the state. It took learning that law at a public library computer on a Tuesday evening because there was no one else to ask, and the library was free. It took a food handler certification that costs $15 and takes 4 hours and produces a laminated certificate that looks unimpressive and is more important than it appears. It took a business registration that costs $50 and a filing fee, and the specific courage required to put your name on a document that says, "This is a real thing, and I am responsible for it." It took a commercial kitchen, in this case, a church kitchen on Magnolia Avenue, rented for $15 an hour, from a pastor who asked only that she leave it cleaner than she found it. It took understanding that the oven in a commercial kitchen behaves differently from the oven at home, and that understanding this required failing first and learning from the failure and adjusting. It took pricing math done on the back of grocery receipts and library printouts, cost of goods, vendor fees, production, time packaging, done over and over until the numbers stopped feeling like guesses and started feeling like a floor she could stand on. It took a co-packer, a small licensed facility run by a woman named Gloria, who agreed to a trial run and shook hands in a parking lot while a 7-year-old sat on the hood of a car eating a granola bar. It took delivering the recipe in person and standing beside the production manager and walking through every step because some things cannot be sent by email. It took a UPC code, $250, 12 digits, the difference between something you sell at a table and something a scanner can read. It took the Target Small Business Supplier Program, which exists and which is open to independent food producers, and which found Cassie Drummond, not because she applied to it, but because a man bought 2 slices of pie at a farmer's market every Saturday for several months, and eventually said 4 words that meant more than they appeared to mean. Those are the things that can be listed. Here are the things that don't make it onto lists. It took driving 8 hours to Minneapolis in a car with a check engine light that had been on for 2 years, sleeping 4 hours at a rest area outside Madison, and walking into a conference room the next morning to tell the story of a recipe book to a man who had already decided he was interested but needed to understand why. It took a farmer's market on a Saturday morning when nobody stopped for 2 hours and a 6-year-old who drew a picture on a piece of cardboard and propped it against the table leg, and one woman in a green fleece jacket who stopped because of the drawing and stayed because of the pie. It took a neighbor who turned out to be something other than what she appeared, and the specific kind of loss that comes from finding that out at 11:47 on the night before the hardest morning of the last 2 years. It took making pie anyway. It took sending a 4-sentence email at 12:47 in the morning because the work does not stop, because you are in pain, and you already know that, and you have known it for a long time. It took a car that parked outside at 3 in the morning and sat with its lights off for 11 minutes and then left. It took lying in the dark and listening to it go and getting up the next day anyway. It took a custody hearing and a signed contract and 30 days between them that required both things to be true at the same time that she was building something and that she was fighting for something, and that neither of those things could wait for the other to be finished first. It took a recipe book with a cracked spine and 4 lines written in pencil on the first page by a woman who believed that the things she knew how to make were worth passing on. It took opening that book on a morning when there was almost nothing left and following it one step at a time, the way you follow a recipe, not because you know how it ends, but because the next step is there and you can take it. Some businesses begin with a plan, with capital and projections and a clear path from here to there. Others begin at a kitchen table with a boy who asks if they are having breakfast and a mother who doesn't answer yet, because the answer she is forming is not about breakfast, and she is not ready to say it out loud. Both kinds are real. Both kinds cost something. The drawer beside the stove in Cassie's kitchen still doesn't close all the way. She has never fixed it. She is never going to fix it. If you had $14.22 and a recipe from someone you loved, would you have started? Tell us in the comments. And if this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs it today.